Welcome back to CodingCat.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks. Brought to you by Cloudinary. Build faster with AI-powered image and video APIs. Need better search? Try Algolia, powering discovery. Woo!
There you go.
Found the right pre-roll. That's exciting. It's always a challenge of mine to get all these videos up ahead of time. So Vincent, you're getting the new background, the new pre-roll. You're first, no editing.
Great.
On my part. Isn't that exciting?
So that's amazing. I'm honored. I would like to thank the Academy.
I won't even slap you through the screen. That's perfect. So Vincent and I used to work at AppWrite together, and more recently, Vincent has moved on. Is that okay to say? I hope.
Yeah, moved on, changed of pace, whatever you want to call it. I have a new job. That's the best way to say it. I have a new job.
Perfect. So let's hit the rewind button. I always like to kind of catch people's history, back up. For a young person like you, it's not a long history, but
right.
I always have to know what got people into tech and development. And I think you have kind of a unique path that you found your way through it. So can you break down when it all began?
Okay, so I was watching this Minecraft stream, not kidding, called Giant Waffle, who was an electrical engineer. And I'm like, that sounds fun. I'm going to be an electrical engineer. That's how I made my decision. I was going to be an aerospace engineer until I talked to some people. They're like, there's no industry in Canada. Bombardier is dying. And I'm like, okay, so I will be another type of engineer. I did my first term in school. I went to Waterloo, and one of the cool things we do is we force people out into the wild and find a paying internship 4-ish weeks into school. So that was when I started looking, and I realized that hey, I can't find a job in electrical engineering because it's much more difficult than software, but I can pretend like I learned how to code. So that's literally how I got into coding, right? My first job was as a mobile QA, but then my first product manager was really amazing, and we worked agile with all of the agile things promises actually working in a team. And I'm like, software development is cooler than hardware. So I pivoted into software. Yeah, and then I went into firmware development, and then that just killed programming for me. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure that kills it for most people, honestly.
Yeah, anyway, I tried 2 terms of product management. I decided that was a little bit too evil because I didn't want to scheme up ways to scam people for money all day, because that's kind of what you end up doing, especially at larger corporate entities where profit really matters, and you have to justify every product decision you make with profit. And then I'm like, that's kind of boring. So I went to the technical writing, because why not, right? That seemed like a natural transition. And so that's how I ended up in developer relations, right? I sort of tried all the paths that didn't work for me. And then I tried technical writing. I'm like, yes, I like writing things and expressing things and telling people stories. And then, yeah, that's how I ended up.
So wait a minute. What was your actual degree in?
Computer engineering.
Okay.
So I
learned how to make... in my head that it was writing at one point, but that's totally wrong.
Yeah, I learned how to make tensor processors, which if I had stayed in the field now, I'd be very employable, right? Because, AI and stuff, but I didn't. I learned how to do FPGA stuff, how to design integrated circuits for computers, that kind of stuff.
Oh. That's dope. I really like it. So at what point did you say to yourself, I'm an awesome writer, this is what I want to do?
I think it's really funny.
Most engineers I know are terrible at writing, including myself.
I think the way it works for me is that I'm not a native English speaker, but most people can tell. And that's when I realized that hey, I might actually be pretty good at this whole language and talking thing. Because around 4 or 5 years after I came to Canada, I'm like, wait, I picked up the second language very fast, and I'm doing better than my classmates. So
can we break that down a little further? So you grew up in...
I grew up in China. I came here when I was 12-ish years old. And then by the time I was in grade 10, 11 in high school, I was doing better than my classmates. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm okay at writing. But of course, like I'm an immigrant. There's no way I would have gone into like history or philosophy or any form of arts. Not an acceptable way to go. So I went into engineering. Yeah.
So do people often pick up on like a like dialect piece there where it's like, hey, you sound Canadian, but then they're like, there's more to the Canadian than just Canadian. There's a little Chinese flair to it.
Yeah, there's certain words that I find really difficult to pronounce. Yeah, there you go. You can pick it. You can pick up sometimes. Like the word monster traditionally has been something that I struggled with because like that O sound is like front of mouth, but like in Chinese, we want like to place it way back in the head, and it ends up sounding like monster. Like I have a lot of trouble with certain words, and people do pick up.
That's pretty awesome. It's funny, like, because when I first met you, I didn't think you were Canadian at all. And then you
Mhm.
started saying a few things, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is definitely a Canadian I'm speaking with. But then there was certain words I'd be like, huh. And I think we had a whole like hour-long conversation when we
Yeah,
walked to a I guess it was a museum. I guess it was like a church, something like that.
something. It was in Serbia, right?
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
in Serbia, and it was
Yeah, yeah. I told you
just
this exact story.
yeah, and it was fantastic to hear, kind of just like how you kind of immigrated and kind of grew up in Canada and stuff. So I find it pretty amazing to be able to find a person that is in a technical field, but yet so passionate about writing, and usually in a usually in the language like you're not even native to. Like I find it just amazing. It's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
I mean, I think it helps because what happens is if you grew up speaking English at a native level and then you learn English through high school, the way they teach you to write is to write write in a way that shows up that you know English too well. And it becomes like counterintuitive because so I actually hired an intern for AppWrite as a technical writing intern before I left, and I left the day he joined. So
Oh, no.
we're still talking. He's an actual English major, and we both agree that like in technical writing, the key is to write complicated concepts like you didn't know how to speak English well. Because if you knew all of the words, like the perfect words and perfect sentence structure to exactly express what you need to say, and there is a way to do that. Like he's an English major, right? We noticed that like no one can understand what you're saying at that point because like with perfect grammar, with writing everything in a perfect way, it takes more time to read because there's more syntactic sugar and you end up using vocabulary that's just like unnecessary. I have no problem using the word big like 20 times in the same paragraph if I have to. I will not be like big, huge, enormous, like pick all the words out of the thesaurus. I will just use big 20 times. And I think that helps.
I mean, yeah.
For
See,
documentation.
that's stuff that I have no problems with either. But I think like if you're talking to a writing major, they're gonna break that down and go, "What are you doing?" And like the editor is gonna red check through that whole thing and say,
Yeah.
"Fix this," and get out the thesaurus and go to town, right? Sorry, kids, I'm old. Thesaurus is that thing that you right click and it does stuff.
It's old ChatGPT.
That's right. All right. So we're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna talk about turning documentation into a product. And Vincent's gonna explain to us why that is so important.
Cool.
Cloudinary allows you to remove any unwanted backgrounds, so you can reuse assets efficiently. You can also erase objects and people from images for placement in new experiences. For more engaging content, easily turn static images into dynamic animations, and rely on smart cropping to always deliver assets with a focus on the most relevant objects to your brand. Cloudinary Programmable Media. Build faster with AI-powered image and video APIs.
Algolia helps you create a search and discovery engine in 3 steps. Step 1, import your data. Import the API client, initialize the client and index, load the local JSON file, and then push to Algolia. Step 2, configure relevance. Define searchable attributes. add business metric, specify facets and filtering. And step 3, build your search UI, import widgets from the library, add instant search component, add search input, refine by attribute, display results, add pagination. And just like that, you're done. Build search effortlessly with Algolia.
I've never watched a full tech ad like this before.
Huge thanks to both Algolia and Cloudinary. They now are running our site for us essentially, because I mean, without media and search, what's a site? I mean,
Exactly.
so yes, we're using both now. I rewrote the site over the course of a month to Next.js. We have a Sanity backend. I'm using like all my ambassador things. So I'm a Sanity ambassador. So we're using that as a backend once again, which has been a lifesaver. I don't think I'll ever go back to a markdown CMS. Sorry, I can't do it.
Why Next, not Astro?
So like Astro, I think is great for a documentation website, and I think it's great for markdown files. I don't know if I love it for, and maybe I'm wrong, but like once you go down the Astro road, I kind of feel like you still have to pick a language, right? So like,
Yeah.
unless you're going to write all the web components by hand, which I don't have time for, I think you're still going to pick a React or a Svelte or a something on top of Astro. So I kind of just steered away from it and went back to something I was using years ago. The other piece, there's kind of like a few different things. I'm going down a crazy rabbit hole right now, but from an Next.js standpoint, like it's the number one framework, right? Like React is the number one language, so I can find a lot of tools very easily too that are baked in. And one of the coolest ones, since we're going down this road, I might as well show you. Let's see here. So v0.dev, have you heard of this?
Yep. That's definitely.
So like if there's something I want, like a homepage.
Oh, you're paying for this too?
Not yet, but
Not yet? Okay.
I might. So like this starts to give me ideas and I can iterate, and like as soon as I'm done, this is now what I use to create pages.
Yep. I love it.
It's been a huge time saver for me. But I can still get down nitty gritty to all the actual like language points. So it's not as kind of far out there as, you know, like a Builder.io or something like that, where the whole visual side of it is all CMS based. There's still a ton of code. So yeah, that's kind of why, I guess.
Cool. I'm always curious.
So I want to show off a couple sites, 2 of them from our sponsors, and then 2 of them from our past places, I guess. And just take a look at like documentation. I want to get like your feeling for them, and then let's talk more about why these things are like full products. So let's bring these up. So
it's really funny because this is how I interview candidates when I interview technical writers. We roast documentation together.
No, I love it. So let me do these 2, and then I'll show you probably one of my favorite ones.
Okay.
So this is Cloudinary, and I like how they start on their docs. They have search right up at the top, a couple keywords here. These are always the challenging points. Like these are what we struggle with at work too. It's like, okay, where do we get people started? Do you want to go like right to the SDKs and quick starts and examples? Like I love that aspect of it. And so you get the traditional kind of, here's where you are in the guide, getting started, those sort of things, and then we can. I don't see an Astro, sorry. So we'll pick just JavaScript here. So this is all pretty good. Like you've got code blocks, all that fun stuff. Algolia is very like different in the sense that they kind of start out like at the very top of what the heck is Algolia, right? And so they have all these like new things in the docs. I kind of like this too, though. Like I like that. Like if you've been on their docs a lot and you always hit this homepage, it is kind of nice to know like what are the new things that have been added. I also like this call out on the right over here. What do you think about that?
I'm a fan of these callouts for earlier stages of your journey through the docs, especially like if you're in the getting started guide. Like a lot of times, these things help. Later on, I personally would remove them beyond the getting started guide.
So maybe
because-
like down in here, if we click, it goes away.
Yeah, I think so. And the reason why I say these things is because like we care about retention. Anyway, we're gonna go into like the dirty world of metrics and measuring performance and all of those things for a
I love
typical
it.
product. But
So a couple more, just
Mhm.
high level. So Vincent, basically, I mean, I could be wrong, but this is mostly you, right?
Yep. I believe even up until now, I think 90% of the pages are probably still written by me. I've only been gone for a month, so
Yeah. So all of this has been written by Vincent.
the API references are generated, and then all of the pages are handwritten, which is pretty nice.
Are the SDKs? These are
The
these are
SDKs,
just
yeah,
pulled. I got
they're
you.
generated. Yeah.
It's been so long since I looked. Yeah. So I like the steps through here too.
Yeah.
Do you recall what
Mhm.
these are built out of? This isn't Astro, is it?
This is Svelte kits, and
Okay.
the
Oh, that's right.
person, which absolute mad lad, spent a weekend and built a Svelte kit markdoc preprocessor. So this is he basically built Astro's like markdoc preprocessor for Svelte, and we're using, Elad wrote all of these components, which is pretty awesome.
Nice.
Um,
That's
I
good stuff.
I asked for these specific components during the design process because when we did the rebrand, we had a chance to like rewrite everything in our docs, which was really really fun.
That is cool. A lot of work though. Holy smokes.
Yeah. 2
Um,
months.
and this is my product that we work on.
Mhm.
So this is our docs. At this page, I'm gonna say I think we're still in Webflow, but the minute you jump into this, actually, no, I could be wrong. I can't remember where it leaves off. Because on Quick Starts, Quick Starts is definitely Astro. I know that. I think that top level docs page is too, but so this is Astro, just for all the Astro fans out there.
Nice.
But yeah, same thing. We struggle with like getting people from like even this page
Yeah.
to like where do we get them into this? Is it here? And that takes you somewhere else. Like it's always a struggle trying to figure out where to send people the quickest way. I always say go to the quick starts. So yeah. So those are some samples. My favorite docs still are Stripe. I love Stripe's
Yeah, I do too.
implementation, and I think it's probably, if it's not in most people's top 10 docs, I would be blown away. So
Yeah.
cool.
So, I mean, Stripe is great. Although I will say one thing. I liked Stripe stocks back in 2020 a lot more than I do now. I
Oh,
think
maybe
Stripe
I
as a
haven't.
product has bloated beyond recognition compared to before. I think
Yeah.
a lot of us still have like a rosy memory of what it was like, but if you try to navigate through their docs, like you can't find anything anymore. The product's huge, but
Oh,
I mean,
interesting.
they're successful now, so that's
Right. They have a lot of features. That's true.
yeah.
That's interesting. I haven't touched it in a while, but yeah, some similarities still.
Yeah.
It has changed though, hasn't it? Wow.
It has. But they
Bummer.
have this interactive walkthrough for examples now where you have multiple full files and you scroll through the markdown and it highlights the bits that it's referencing.
Wait, what?
And I built a version of
do
that.
this. What is this? So like you go through this?
I don't know where it is. I can't find it. That's the problem. Is they have so many pages, but they have like an interactive thing here. I can actually probably pull that up. But
That's pretty amazing.
anyway, we'll talk about this later. I'll send
Okay.
you to my
All right.
repo.
That sounds good. All right. So we just looked at a ton of different docs pages. And I think for most people starting like a product, that's not number one on their list. Like it's pretty much I need to get the product out. But if you're writing it for any sort of developer, someone that has to like utilize that product, if you can't tell them how to do that, you got a problem. So Vincent's going to tell us all about how you can turn documentation into a product as well.
Yeah, I mean, here's my thing with it is the first thing you have to do is to be able to like convince your team that your documentation is worth investing in like a product. And like you said, like it's always an afterthought, unfortunately. Like as a technical writer, I want it to feel like the first thing people think about. But there's a lot of like really, really solid reasons. Some of them are like easy to explain to the engineers because and the designers, because you're going to tell them like, we're going to try documenting this. If this is impossible to document and I can't explain it concisely in documentation, the product like is shit. That's just the plain truth. Like if you've ever written documentation for something and you're like, I can't explain why this works this way to somebody else. And I've had this at every place that I've worked at. There's usually something that like is wrong with the product and users recognize it. But that's not like a good enough business reason. The real business reason is because like if you make a developer product, the only sustainable way to scale up your product for adoption is through documentation and self-serving. Like I've never seen a single developer product that's been sold solely B2B through support and Discord channel support that's been able to scale, because like you will run out of people to support other people very quickly.
Sure. Yeah.
And people give up so quickly now. Like it's when, you know, even compared to 2017 where people were like, I can't remember which survey I looked at. There's this like little group of technical writers that that like pulled out a couple bits of like analytics from different places they've worked at. On average, like 2016, 2017, people spent about 3 times as much time on a typical documentation page than they do now. And like if you go back to 2010, I wouldn't be surprised if like the average page visit time is like 10x what people are willing to tolerate now.
Do you feel like that's because people are like moving to videos, or because like our consciousness as a society has gone to the like the TikTok level of I can only look at this for 10 seconds?
All of the above and AI.
Oh,
And that's an even better reason to have well-organized docs, is to be able to feed the models, to be able to give, for them to be able to give correct answers. And I'll talk about that later, maybe if we have time. But like there's certain things we're experimenting with like how you can organize a page. So like it can be indexed really nicely by like ChatGPT, because like some of our weird page layouts with like lots of carousels and like expandables, it's not accessible and it's not great for AI anyway. So like that's really the reason, right? Like you have to really make that case for your team, and you have to do the math for them, right? It's like if we want to adopt, we want 1,000 users to adopt our product. Here's the investment for investing a lot in docs upfront. Here's the investment that we're going to have to do for like growing a community and a support team and like all the different ways to answer these questions that we're going to be able to answer, and we can measure them. Like it's whenever you go through a big docs undertaking, you measure the amount of support hours like before and after, right? And usually there's like a pretty significant difference. So like a part of what I mean by owning it as a product is like people writing documentation have to start thinking of it as a product, like for them to be able to justify why that time needs to be invested. Yeah, so that's like my first take on why documentation needs to be treated as a product. But I also think one of the reasons why I say docs needs to be treated as a product is exactly like some of the issues that you had before, is like, how do you get a user from that marketing page, right? How do you get them to be converted so that they're in documentation? And how do you make documentation so that like it serves part of the purpose as the marketing page, right? How do you measure the flow? And you were talking about like how different, if we look at the different documentations, how they all had different approaches to how they led the users through the journey, and like where the entry point is. Some start with SDKs, like Algolia has a getting started, but like on their homepage, they're trying to lead to a video. And that really depends on another thing, which I don't think technical writers do enough, is they don't understand the product's user journey well enough, right? I think you should treat documentation as a product, because people going through documentation follow very much the same developer journey or user journey, whatever you want to call it, as like a user. people, because if you think about it, documentation is the only touch point for a software product where you go through every stage of every stage of the cycle adopting a new tech product. You go from discovery to like evaluating the product, to learning the product, to building with it, to scaling with it. All of it happens in the docs. And so what I often see is if you just threw thoughts on a page in a big piece of documentation, it doesn't flow in that natural cycle. If you think about it this way, like a lot of times people will put big giant explainer concept page, like this is how this thing work, like randomly throughout the documentation.
Yeah.
And it's annoying for everybody because if I'm in the discovery part of the journey, I'm just trying to figure out what this product does, but it's not kept in one place neatly. I have to navigate through like many layers, many pages to be able to piece together that information. But it's equally as annoying when we don't understand that upfront cost and do a good job on the navigation for people who's adopting the product, because you're just looking for that code snippet for a particular feature that you're trying to do something on. You go on a page and you have to scroll through the first 20 paragraphs explaining to you why this product is awesome before you get to it. And when you don't put in that effort to like really treat documentation as a product and understand that flow and iterate on it based on that flow, you end up with amazing documentation that's complete, but you do it in a way that expects someone to read all of it before it makes sense. And so there's like a lot of things that like on a very base level that I this is why I think of documentation as a product, right? Because like the more I look at it and the more I go through these exercises, improving documentation, writing documentation from scratch, drawing from my background in product management, I'm like, I'm doing the same things, right?
So when we talk about like it as a product, and you talk about kind of like, if we say agile approach to docs and like starting the thing, how does that correlate, or how do you like take the real product and this kind of new product that is the docs? How do you combine those, especially like on cycles and like keeping everything up to date and things like that? What are best practices for that?
Yeah, I mean, when we launch documentation sites, I believe docs deserve the same go-to-market strategy spiel as an actual product, because in any go-to-market, basically you're trying to figure out like what is the value proposition that will like land someone to go and explore that product, and you think about it all the way in terms of a funnel from taking that product, trying it for the first time, to becoming a paying customer. And you have to measure, different parts of the journey. You have to measure success throughout the funnel and like all of that fancy product management things. I think it's the same thing is true for documentation, right? Because a lot of times what we end up doing is we write documentation. It exists now. We point people to it and we forget about it. And even when I joined Trunk, on their website, documentation used to be hidden under a second layer of navigation for a developer product. And this is what happens, right? When you don't treat documentation as product, you're just like, it needs to exist. We write it, it's done, it's out there. And the discoverability for documentation at that point is like horrible. Like even till today, and I'm a little ashamed of this because I haven't pushed for the change yet, but like you can't navigate to the documentation on Trunk's website on your phone. It's hidden in the mobile navigation. And that's horrendous. Like that should have never happened.
I see what you're saying.
So really what it is you have to treat it as in, you have a full user journey, right? Like throughout a product. And you have to think in terms of touch points of a user going through that journey. At which touch points do they need to be linked to docs? And throughout which parts of the journey should they be exposed to the docs, right? Because docs serve a particular purpose. We often write docs just to be like, this is to convey information. But like often it really relates to like how that product flows naturally. So like, for example, when you adopt the product, from logging in, like creating an account, or like if it's a developer product, through like installing and doing something with it, that process will naturally lead you through adopting a certain set of features in a particular order. In your docs, that order should be reflected, and that navigation should match very well with that journey, so you can link to it. And so you have to think about documentation in terms of, for example, Firebase, oddly enough, does a really good job. When you get a lot of errors, Firebase links to the docs. For a developer product with their SDK, that's absolutely the way to do it. For a lot of products, They like to like have that weird little like question mark on the top right corner. I
Yeah.
hate it. So what I really like to do, when possible, is because docs now can be rendered into like Markdown, right? It's often a really good idea to have those Markdowns be partials and use the same bits of Markdowns in your docs versus in the product. They should match one-to-one. A lot of the times you can just like write the docs in a way that like it works in both places. Having the docs in the product is important. A second option, which is not nearly as great, is throughout that journey, you can like link to the docs in a more organic way. So instead of having what I often like to do is instead of having like a wizard with like the instructions written on the page of the wizard, each step of the wizard, you just link them to the docs, and you have like the docs in a way that like has the steps matching exactly with the wizard, so you can follow them side by side. That's also an option. So it's really about really understanding the way that a user flows through your product as they adopt the product, that journey, and matching the documentation as closely to that as possible.
How do you often like update that or actually feel that out? Do you do like kind of customer research videos where you're following someone just getting onboarded to the product like without any documentation, or do you watch them go through your docs and struggle and like update it? Like how does that usually work for you?
I think a lot of those things work, and they're for much later in the journey. I think by the point you're ready to do an interview with a developer, you already have a product, you already have documentation, and you already have something that works.
Okay.
I want to go earlier than that. When the designers and the product people design the product, you should be thinking about the documentation flow then. Like I always interrupt designers and product management people, whatever it is. I will be there as they develop the product, and I will be writing the shell of the documentation as they plan out their journey, like the user journeys. And often what's really funny is like we will both notice, me and the product people or designers will notice like this part of that user journey is really stupid because it doesn't map well into docs. Or the other way around, we're like, it sounds great in docs as I've written it out, but like in the user journey, it doesn't make sense. And so like if you don't catch it earlier enough and they've made a really awkward user journey that doesn't make sense to document, it's like too late.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also like as a engineer, like a developer side of things, that sounds difficult to have being done at the same time too. Like you're trying to figure out the product, you're trying to figure out the best thing for the customer at the end of the day, and yet like trying to document it out. And like I feel like there's going to be so much twists and so much change that occurs during that process that it almost feels like there needs to be more self-documentation that occurs through that process until you get more stable, at least. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. And I don't mean documenting something to full details.
Sure.
I think documentation, people focus too much on the details of like, this is the exact way that it should be written now with the exact code examples. But I think the way the navigation is organized in documentation matters a lot more than the content of the page. I think any engineer can write amazingly detailed documentation with all of the right steps to reproduce a problem or to do something exactly. We're very good at that, right? If you think about the way that an engineer thinks about problems, we're very used to reading documentation and writing things in procedures. And writing documentation is like no different from describing to a machine how to do something. You have more leeway with documentation than you have with like describing a problem to a machine.
Yeah.
But the problem is that's often not the problem. Like you said, the difficult part of documentation is trying to figure out how to make it flow in a way that like is really easy to follow. That's the really hard part, is how you get someone to like enter the documentation, be able to find what they need really, really quickly, and be able to follow it through that way.
Yep, that makes sense. I'm curious, if you were to start your own business, start your own product, what, or if any, documentation tool would you use today? Like, is there like a Starlight from Astro or like DocuSource or whatever it might be? Is there something that you would like? You're not trying to catch like views just based on your docs at this point, but just literally like trying to stay focused in creating that doc product. Is there something that you would suggest to people?
When you start, I would start something, one, markdown based, and two, as vanilla and generic as possible, because you're going to move.
Sure.
I really don't like products like Gitbooks, even though I use Gitbooks now at work, because it doesn't come out as neat of a markdown document as some of the other tools let you. I think Astro is great because for the most part, it supports MarkDoc or Markdown that any other Markdown processor can understand. It is reasonably extensible. Like Starlight is great, and you can make it look like your brand pretty quickly. Because like when you start, it really like it doesn't. You're not trying to do anything fancy. You're just trying to get stuff down on a page, and know that if you need to move to a custom documentation site later, which you will, because whether it's Document Source or Starlight or whatever it is, if you look at it, it's a very linear layout. But like they expect you to stay on that right nav and stay fairly consistent, and for that whole process to be fairly linear. But if you look at something like Stripe's documentation now, it's split into like 5 different subdomains with like a million different paths in navigation that you can't do with something like Starlight. They're 100% using something that they built themselves, but like the point is like start somewhere like Starlight or DocuSource or like ViewPress, whatever it is, that is reasonably well in documenting things with just plain Markdown that you can move to something else later that you need.
I like that. That's nice. And how do you start to, like, we talk about it being a product. How do you kind of start to do like ROI type, like performance-based research on your docs?
Yeah, so I think there's, again, it's about measuring that journey, right? Like your documentation is essentially a journey. Discovery is like that first page, that landing page. And you go through that landing page and overview pages and you treat it as a discovery phase. That's like what everybody reads first. And you measure drop off. So you have mentally, you have a model of like each individual page of going through discovery, evaluate, learn, build, scale, or whatever funnel you want to come up with. It doesn't matter. Like just come up with some mental model where they flow through your product and you measure drop off. And very often, let's say your getting started guide is really crap or it doesn't work. You'll notice that like everybody goes through discovery and reads your overview pages. By the time they get to learn, you'll see a sharp drop off between there and other people going to build pages. You either aren't linking to the build pages somewhere in the navigation where they can find them after following the getting started guide, or people are getting frustrated because the getting started guide is like trash, right? And you can measure those different parts of the funnel. And like that, when you start to do that and you really start to like take account for how many people that lands on that first page can actually follow through the intended journey that I wanted to. So for example, getting started with the database, creating an index, like you probably have some mental flow of what you want that to look like. How many people are finishing that journey? And you start to realize little really interesting things where like people are dropping off at a particular part of the journey and you start trying to figure out why. You start to find really interesting things that eerily resembles product management. For example, like a lot of times with getting started or like a lot of quick guides, what you're not giving people enough is like often quick wins. So for example, if I gave you a 20-page tutorial and there are no checkpoints at any point that you know whether or not you followed it correctly, and you have to follow like 100 steps until you finish at a product, and I'm telling you, run the app now, and you run into an error, you're like gonna flip the table and you're just gonna leave because there's no way for you to debug that.
Yep.
But what we found is that at the end of every page, each page should be no more than like 5 to 10 steps. You try to end at a point where there's a checkpoint that they can like run and see what they've built so far. For example, if you're telling them how to build a React app, you will notice a drastic increase in the amount of retention, both throughout the journey and the chances of them finishing that on a high and being like, if you have links after, like try these things, they will click them a lot more often. But when you end at that page, they run the product, they run the app they just built. It doesn't work at all. You haven't given them quick wins and checkpoints throughout the thing and congratulate them. Like, run the app now. You should see this. Wow, amazing. Good job. You made a thing happen. They will drop off and they'll leave, right? And it's the same thing as like product management, right? Like when you first get someone to adopt a product, you want them to make something useful out of that app, like within the first like 5-6 clicks. This is why, like, the same reasons why people aren't asking for credit cards. The sign up process is usually like delayed until later in the process. Like,
Yeah.
it's the same things.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. What am I missing, Vincent?
I don't know. What do you want to talk about? What has been plaguing you in the world of technical writing?
I feel like at some point, and you touched on it, like it'll all be replaced by AI.
Yeah.
But the hard part in saying that is every case is so unique. Like building your LLM around that is challenging. So like you almost need a source of that content to build your rags and stuff. Like when we say like it should replace everything in the future, what does that look like to you, or where do you see documentation headed in the next 5-10 years?
I believe documentation will still need to exist, but it will exist for maybe a slightly different purpose. Right now, we expect people to start a journey with documentation
Mm-hmm.
and end the journey with documentation. In the future, what I expect it to become is we write most of the documentation explicitly to give, because, you know, someone needs to teach these models what to say.
Right.
And they can't all come from code, because the way we interpret and describe code is different from the way that, like, the code itself is written. I think at some point, in my mind, we'll write documentation in a way mostly to be like, hey, Mr. LLM, these are the things that you need to know. And I would expect people to start the first parts of the journey really with the help from an LLM, right? And like the only point at which point they'll return to documentation is when they start to do really, really creative and like weird stuff that nobody else is doing. Because I don't think LLMs will ever be good enough at all of the niche things you can do with a product. Like the point at the point where like ChatGPT fails to give you, or Copilot fails to give you any good parts of the good responses to like the questions that you're asking, that's when you know you've dug really deep into a language or a technology. And I think that's where documentation is still going to be really important, because you're just not going to have enough like examples to train that LLM on for them to be able to like correctly guess what you're trying to do. Like when you're really trying to abuse a product for purposes that it's not perfectly intended to do,
Yeah.
you're going to need to go to docs.
That's true. Okay, I love it. All right, we're gonna pivot, folks, and we're gonna do what we like to call our perfect picks. I'll show mine off first, just to get things rolling here. So I was looking for specifically the NIM stuff that's coming out for NVIDIA, but this is kind of where I ended up. So I made this my pick. So if you go to build.nvidia.com, you can kind of explore all of their different models that they're pulling in. I think you can bring in more, but like this is just a sampling. And the cool part is you can like pick and choose what they'll run, and you can kind of tie them together. So like whatever, if I go to this one, beautiful actor, that's interesting. Let's say like I think my wife for her birthday is gonna get a black cat tattoo on a person's right arm. Let's see what this does. Let's not make it a photograph. Let's do an illustration.
Ugly, blurry, childish. What are those?
Those are the negative prompts.
Okay.
So let's see what comes up in their little docs. Prompts that are fed to the model to specify what a user doesn't want to see.
Okay, interesting.
So that's frightening, but yeah. So that's one example of many of their different things that you can use via API too. So like, if you ever want to build through this, you can. Their docs look like this, and so their NIM reference that I was kind of getting at is in here. And there's our very like boring technical docs, which I would fully expect from NVIDIA. So
Yep.
Expectations, what they are.
Looks
Anyways.
like Apple developer documentation.
yeah, exactly. That stuff's rough. So anyways, this is kind of the full setup for their NIM stuff, and you can go through a ton of different open models that are out there. But if you've played around with Happy Face, you're probably pretty familiar with this. All right, Vincent, your pick. Much more fun than mine.
Yeah. video setup, you need lights. I found one that's magnetic and very, very adjustable and cheap. And these are very small. So it's very easy to like get a bunch of them, stick them onto different services and like make sure your face is well lit. You know, everyone's working remote now. Might as well get it, get light. Lighting matters a lot more than the camera you use. So like, that's why I love these. Anyway.
These are dope. Like if I could get these on Lifix, I probably would roll down that road.
Yeah. Battery powered, rechargeable with a USB-C.
Yes, I'm down to a Apple keyboard and I think headphones that have lightning cable. And then like once those finally die, no more lightning cable. I'll be so excited. All right, folks, we talked a lot about documentation. I hope you got something out of this talk. Vincent actually is wildly intelligent about documentation as a whole. He's been working on it for years now. So if you have any questions, hit him up on Twitter. I have a bug in StreamYard right now, so I can't show your handle, but where can people reach out to you at?
Yeah, you can find me on probably Twitter is the best way, but also on LinkedIn. I go by two names. I'm sometimes called Vincent, sometimes I'm called Winyu, so I'm a little bit difficult to search up. But
You can always come to CodingCat.dev for this post, and you'll
Exactly.
find the author and guest, and click on that guest, and he's got all his socials hooked up. So
Yep.
that's the other way to find him. Cool. Well, thank you once again, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Nice
Okay.
catching up with you.